Hello and welcome once more to the Port Huron Statement. This is your host with the most, the Count of Saint-Germain. The Roger Sheldon. Charles Dalnay. You can call me Isha. Anyway. So, there's so much, and trying to, get a more permanent studio location, which will accommodate more guests and such. There's so many things. So I have to, hopefully I'm going to make the case, a little bit later today that, a feature-length documentary about the complex corruption and exploitation schemes that are going on locally, and not just locally, actually nationally, but that have been covered locally, and hopefully I can sell it. Because having the funding to not only have the production values, but being able to pay people and get appropriate, a big enough team so it can be done quickly and comprehensively, so it can realize something closer to justice. And this is really important, not just locally, it's important internationally, because I get involved because of the effects on my personal life and the lives of people around me that I care about. But now I'm seeing, how internationally relevant it is. If we don't have good government, well-informed people here in the United States, it compromises the quality of life and the likelihood of a just and equitable society anywhere. And why that is complex. Obviously, the United States is, the geography of it is the most resource-rich land, essentially, on the planet. And that coupled with, the way that World War II and World War I went down, the United States really, is super wealthy because of the vast resources and because of historical events. It's not wealthy because of good government, but the thing is it's so impactful on not only like the global economy, but also on the internal politics of virtually every single nation on the planet. The ones that aren't being influenced by the United States are being actively obstructed or interfered with, sabotaged by the United States through a myriad of different mechanisms. And this concept of like this nation's better, blah 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 blah, is really misleading and distracting. The fact is that the United States, because of historical events and the vast resources that were in such a pristine state, the native populations had, because of lower numbers, but also because of the way that they coexisted with the ecosystem, it allowed for the resources to continue to replenish. However, the great European capitalistic success, the thing that really reinforced across world, the influential world of the more capitalistic ideology being the right one, had to do with the successive colonization in North America, specifically the way that the French versus the English not only, utilized the Americas, but how they interacted with the native cultures. Essentially, the land tenure system the French were using and the less aggressive land acquisition sort of stance. I'm not saying the French were good, and obviously in different time periods, different government. It's all wildly dependent on personnel and in the moment. It's hard to, but I guess you can compare a lot of these leaders like Champlain versus Columbus, or you can compare someone like LaSalle and oh my gosh, there's so many crappy and stupid. I'm trying to think of an early. I just was reading about a bunch of these too. Well, there's I think one that's like, who came right after LaSalle? The point is there were the people that came to the Americas and were more objective, and less sort of self. Gosh, I'm sorry. The ones that were more intelligent and less exclusively determined to amass wealth or status, the ones that were less prone to bigotry, like the success, like Champlain, has a very amicable relationship with multiple different, native tribes and even individuals. He sends his sons to go live with different native, headmen and influential people. And doesn't one of his sons or daughters marry a native, like a Huron or something? Maybe an Iroquois, I don't remember. But, Champlain respects the natives that he ends up cooperating with. And, that it's critical to establishing a functional settlement. And then immediately after, that goodwill and cooperation is exploited. He's one. That's what keeps this theme over and over again. They have these intelligent and well-meaning individuals that cooperate with the natives, and then that cooperation is subsequently, the goodwill and good faith is exploited by a, subsequent leader, and ultimately what happens is the resources are, the ecosystem gets raped, the natives get displaced, they're encouraged to fight between one another. I don't know, I'm getting way off, but it's the echoes of the same thing. It's the lawfare to displace a massive number of people, weaponized homelessness and weaponized hunger through artificial scarcity as a means of creating this big criminal population exclusively for the purpose of economically exploiting them. They created situations in Europe. They got away from like the feudal land tenure system where people were born into having like a right to live on the property as a tenant. In exchange they would cultivate the lord's lands. The lord would then have the right to take their surplus, crops, but in exchange it was his responsibility to see to the welfare of his, tenant peasants and, provide them with the implements and shelter that they needed. It's chattel slavery more or less, but But the thing is now, if you get a job, you can work full time, and you don't actually have the income to afford, your housing and your food. You're not paid enough to pay for housing and food. So, what's a superior system? The fact is that there is no absolutely superior system. It's about its application. Obviously, a chattel system is not a good system, but it just because you don't have explicitly legal slavery doesn't mean that there is not slavery. And you could argue that it is worse because, the employers have been able to, essentially obfuscate all of their responsibilities, have been able to skirt the sort of social quid pro quo. If you're going to have the potential to have these vast resources above the general public, then that's supposed to come with a risk. But they've been able to use legislation to offset almost all. In fact, they've offset all risk. This brings me to actually the point of this guy. There are a couple things that I really do feel like I need to talk about. Most of the ones that I need to talk about are more local. But this brings me into TARP, the Troubled Asset Relief Program, which is one of the things on the very top of my list because it's very important locally, nationally, and internationally. This program is so underreported, yet it's still so impactful on humanity. But the Troubled Asset Relief Program was the program that allowed the banking industry, the mortgage banking industry in the United States, to get reimbursed for troubled assets, meaning that if they issued a mortgage or similar loan device, similar secured loan device, that was subsequently defaulted on due to the economic crisis caused by predatory loan practices by the same banks, and how predatory they are takes a lot of explaining. Because if you fully understand the consequence of manipulating subprime mortgages to a huge population of the lower middle class and middle class, and part of the selling point is the appreciation, and obviously the lower middle class and middle class can appreciate that. The primary reason that they're not in a higher station is because of the fact that being exploited by rent and not being able to access the passive income generating schemes that the wealthy are, that's where they make all their money. It's not through labor or direct productivity. It's through passive income by setting up structures that pay you without necessarily directly needing your action. And so ultimately, the idea that's sold to the American people is that you can get this huge loan. So, with these balloon introductory payments, so they're being sold all right, so initially you're only going to be paying the interest, and then after 5 years or whatever, then you're going to start paying the principal. But in those 5 years, you're going to get a raise and a promotion, and even if not, the appreciation on the value of the house is going to increase its value such that you can refinance, or you could theoretically, sell the house and go into something smaller, blah, 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 blah. The housing market's so hot, you just could potentially offset all of the, you're gaining more in the appreciation of the house than you're losing in the interest that you're paying on the mortgage, which was true especially with, wildly low mortgage rates. But the thing, it all depends on the housing market continuing to appreciate. But the housing market is quite literally appreciating because they're issuing these wild loans. And so, because they're issuing wild loans, the value of the house is increasing. The very value of all these houses is artificially appreciated thanks to these, loan schemes and scams. And ultimately what happened is they decided that even though there was an enormous amount of fraud in a lot of these loans, like we're talking about literally hundreds of thousands of cases of the loan officer actually committing fraud regarding the income of the individuals. And so people that actually were the victims of fraud, because they're being told by the loan officer that they can afford the mortgage and that blah, 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 blah. Now, the loan officer is getting paid exclusively by the mortgage, doesn't matter what the result of it is. So the structure was established to be victimizing and predatory, while the people that are actually enacting the predatory scheme are completely ignorant that they're defrauding the homeowners or the buyers. And the buyers are in a position where they don't really have much of a choice because they've been priced out because so many people have utilized these mortgage schemes that it increased the values so wildly. And then you ended up with speculation that further increased the bubble. It's like all of these things, by giving more money to the economy to buy houses, I mean, that's what we kind of need to do. But the problem is that using predatory lending practices in order to profit on the greater appreciation, and then also, obviously on the interest and all that, but then as a bank, when it finally, when it backfires, the fact that you've been juicing everything and defrauding everything, when you start to get these foreclosures, millions and millions of them, because of your access to government, rather than, the capitalistic way, where failure is the crime. Like, capitalism means that the government isn't supposed to bail you out. You're, economically supposed to be on your own. That's the survival of the fittest, all the things that they claim will make our country stronger. So they gave trillions of dollars to the banks, taxpayer money, to offset the losses that they had on these mortgages that they defrauded people into getting. And then they kicked the people out of the houses. So you have to understand, like, most of these mortgages, the people had paid something like, $40,000 towards, and then they're going to get kicked out of that house. But your income tax is like, you wouldn't even believe how much of your income tax goes to paying for a troubled asset relief program and those two wars. But it's just, anyway, George W. Bush was a terrible, terrible president. But and Obama was for not reversing TARP. 'Cause the thing is all right, the taxpayers are paying for the houses. Why are the taxpayers getting kicked out of those houses? Like, for real. So that the billionaire class gets to keep the house, gets to keep all the money that's been paid on the house to that point, and gets to sell the house, and gets paid for it by the federal government. So it's not that they got any losses replaced. Like, because if the bank was just, they want to get made whole for a problem they created themselves, then they should be given the difference remaining in principal. And obviously, the homeowners need to stay in the houses because the middle class, lower middle class, the working poor, that's who pays for everything. The upper class doesn't pay for shit. And also, they disproportionately tax the system. they're the most needy of all of us. Their businesses use the roads more than anyone else. They're burning the most gas. They're using the most electricity in their houses and in their cars, everything. They're disproportionately using the resources, not only for their personal life, but also in the advancement of their businesses. And so they've won, in our society. And so therefore it is their responsibility to then take care of the society. Like, in a capitalistic system, that if we're going to go pure capitalism, over and over again, it's like, we don't need these programs. We need to make government as small as possible so we can have the assets to do the philanthropy in private industry. That's the only way it's going to be done efficiently, and that's blah, blah. But the problem is that the billionaires aren't actually doing that. They're not coming close to providing the 20% of the income towards the common good, because that's what it's supposed to be. Your income tax is supposed to be a portion of your income generally provided to the population for the common good. That'd be the perfect application. That's what it's supposed to be. But the case that's been made for the ultra wealthy and over and over again why these social programs shouldn't exist is because the government will never be efficient at providing these services, and they won't be good at deciding who needs them. And then also, obviously, because if you give people food and housing, then they're going to get soft and they're not going to be productive. It's actually the exact opposite. Giving people food and housing will make them more productive because they're not going to be spending all their time desperately trying to cope with the issue of not having food and housing, which results in an enormous amount of drug use. Because, of course, how do you sleep outside when it's 20 degrees? You have no other option, like quite literally no other option. And the places that you have available to you to sleep without being bothered by police is very, very low. It's cheaper to get a bus ticket and some drugs than to get into a hotel. You're never going to get a first month's, last month's in that situation. I don't understand why people can't see that, when you're that screwed over by society, the thing that you need is to get high. You need either housing or you need to get high. It's like, just house them. They can't be productive when you can't shower, when, you're so, offensive to most people and to every sense. Like, how are you supposed to be employable? It's a joke to pretend like it's their fault too, because it's just like to say they choose it. A lot of people, there are varying reasons why people end up homeless, but there used to be, even in my lifetime, more of a hobo culture of people that were homeless because they didn't want to be part. They don't want to be. They wanted to ethically withdraw from the horrors of this, socioeconomic paradigm, and those people still exist. But one, it's a much harder existence because just so many different things. The way the application of police is going, the multi-tiered application of law, the fact that there's just very little humanity present in the culture of society and legislation. So you kind of need to hide, and anyone sees you, they're going to treat you like less than human, because, the key thing you have to remember is that there is an enormous amount of indoctrination currently being utilized to dehumanize people. It's in-group politics, extremists, and the way that they have spent money in order to influence the broader culture. This isn't about the election. The election is a reflection, and a symptom. But I'm not even, even if Kamala Harris would have won and we had a blue wave, it would have still been, we'd still be in a nightmare. This is a nightmare in the sense that it's a bunch of nonsense that you need to wake up from. I know I've developed a little international audience because I've put a couple dollars into promotion, and it's like I put $7 in so far, and I decided I wanted to target pretty much any nation that has English speakers, because really, all right, so part of the thing is it's important to show what America really is and really is like, because on one hand, America, the United States, it's the most resource-rich land, the most resource-rich nation, but it is so horribly mismanaged. The resources have been so degraded, and it still is the most resource-rich nation on the planet. But the problem is it's the government is so bad, and it's been bad for a long time. But the poor government of the United States and the business interests that are allowed to run amok as a consequence have everything to do with global inequity. It's that global inequity and the discrepancies in currency value and all these things make labor incredibly exploitable to the class of individuals that can utilize international industry and shipping. So the fact is the international elites gain huge advantage off of inequity, and they are exploiting and indoctrinating the American public into this narcissistic and self-important worldview that they've also simultaneously been able to hijack and twist a couple different religious movements in order to justify this, and it's, when you look at the conclusions that were drawn by Cambridge Analytica and ultimately, Meta, and when you translate them into the future, the level of indoctrination in the United States is profound. They are educating people stupider, and they are preaching them crooked. It's really frustrating to watch. The biggest thing, though, is the degradation in the quality of education. I was educated, not only just the quality of education, but the value of education in the cultural consciousness, and the value of the education offered in K through 12, but also in university and colleges. Everything now is occupational training. There's very little value to intellectual pursuits. In fact, there's like none. They're openly ridiculed, even in academic environments, depending on where you are. This sort of push away from intelligence and the ridiculing of intelligent people and intelligent pursuits. I know it's not everywhere, but in these red districts, it is dominant because of the dominance of Christianity and the twisting of that into obedience, subordination, and subordination to what? Well, that's a good question, but subordination to the Lord. And what's key to subordination to the Lord is subordination to, the religious hierarchy. Kind of tangential, but I'm going to go on to it again because it's so important for the